All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started just to be respectful of everybody's time. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Megan Stewart. I'm Association Manager for NYWICI, and we are excited to have you join us today for an engaging roundtable discussion with global women in PR and NYWICI on harassment in the communications field. I'm excited to hand this over to our treasurer, Linda Descano, who is a past president of NYWICI and is currently serving, how many years is this now, Linda, that you've been our
I
treasurer?
have lost track, but then again, I think
Quite a
it's
while.
been a decade. It's been quite a while.
And Linda's day job, she is Executive Vice President of Havas Red, where she specializes in corporate communications and leads the agency's global executive visibility practice, Peaks. Linda, I'm going to go ahead and hand it on over to you.
Thank you very much, Megan. Good afternoon, good evening. Maybe there's a few morning people from around the world joining us. A pleasure to have the opportunity to facilitate today's roundtable. Now, you will see me look to the left and look to the right because I have notes. So forgive me if I'm not always looking directly at the camera. But today I'm really delighted that we have a chance to discuss Global Women in PR's 2023 annual index, which really looks at the state of women working in PR and comms. What do they see as career opportunities, roadblocks? What are some of the experiences they have? What's helping advance their career? And it's not just to sort of talk about the data and the findings, but also to examine what could each of us do as leaders, as colleagues, as mentors, as members of professional associations to really create opportunity and pave the way for women at all generations from all walks of life who are working in this industry that we all know and love. Today's conversation really is an extension of one that we started last year when we invited Global Women in PR to come talk to us about their 2022 index, which examined many of the same issues, but really took a deep dive into ageism, something that is near and dear to my heart as someone who is in her sixth decade. We had such a positive reaction and response to that roundtable that we wanted to continue the conversation. Joining me today from Global Women in PR are two of their senior leaders and trailblazers in their own right as communicators in their respective markets. The first is Sue Hardwick, who is a co-founder of Global Women in PR and serves as president. She's joining us from the UK. Hi, Sue.
Hi. Hello, everybody.
And then,
nice to be here.
and Melissa Arulapan, who is a founding member and VP of Global Women in PR in India. So, hi, Melissa.
I am so excited to be here. Thank you for having me over.
Our pleasure. And for those of you who are new to Global Women in PR and to New York Women in Communications, both organizations share a commitment to connecting, championing, supporting, and empowering women at all stages of their career. Global Women in PR, as the name implies, has a global remit and has really been steeped and leans into the PR and the communications aspect of the industry, whereas New York Women in Communication focuses broadly on all the disciplines from advertising and marketing to digital and broadcast. And it's, while having a national presence in the US really skews heavily with members in the New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut tri-state area. And both organizations have members from agencies, in-house, freelancers, independent business owners, and I have the privilege of being involved in both. So what we're going to do today is Sue is going to walk us through the results of the 2023 index. We are going to pause as we talk about different topics that were explored to look at what we're seeing, talk a little bit about those results. But this is where you come in. As we go through the results, we'd love for you to join the conversation in the chat. If you have questions, if you have experiences, we'd love to hear what you're seeing from your purview, working at an agency or in-house about some of these topics. So we could really make this conversation as comprehensive as possible, and be sure that you have a voice in shaping what we talk about. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Sue, and Sue, ask you to, and as you can see, I'm already challenged because I didn't even advance the slides to show our photos. But I'm going to ask Sue to talk to us about the genesis of the index, who was surveyed every year, and then we can start talking through the results. So Sue, you can just tell me when you need me to advance each of the slides.
Okay, thank you, Linda, and very nice to be involved with this. Our index, this is the 5th year that we've conducted the annual index, and the objective has been to monitor the changes and to look at how the role of women in our industry has developed, is changing, particularly along when we make up, as we all know, 2/3 of the number in our industry. But sadly, when it comes to the boardroom and senior roles, the position is very different. So instead of saying, whoa, we decided to look into why some of these issues existed, what prevents perhaps women taking on more senior roles, and to understand how women felt about the workplace and what we could do to make change and make our industry a more balanced place to work, and for that, a more profitable place to work. Before I present the surveys, there's one interesting thing that when we launched the survey at the end of last year, or the results, I should say, there was a Harvard professor called Claudia Goldin, who was awarded the Nobel Prize for her work in understanding why there's a gender pay gap. And her research over many years, longer than ours, provides a deeper understanding of the factors that prevent or hamper women's opportunities. And unsurprisingly, her results very much match the results from our index. So we have a Nobel award-winning professor who would agree with some of our findings. As I said earlier, this is, we track and measure the progress towards gender equality in the workplace. Linda, if you could. The women we spoke to come from in-house and agency and independents, and the majority are working full-time. And as you can see, we interviewed women across 35 countries and with online interviews to get some detailed information about what is happening to those women in our industry at the moment. Linda, if you could. One of the key issues that has come up time and time again, and certainly over the last 5 years, is the issue of flexible working. And it's such an important topic. And of course, it's changed dramatically with the pandemic, creating a wholly different environment for all of us. However, it's still an issue that's very important. And we'll look a little more, Linda. We've seen a huge shift in the dynamic and between employer and employee post-pandemic. Working from home and the balance is rarely out of the news these days. And there are many leaders at the moment who are suggesting that the situation is going to change. There are many companies now advertising jobs that require their employees to be back in the office full time. They're not even offering flexible working. However, the policies that are in place and have been adopted have proved to be incredibly popular. So I think whilst flexibility remains a key issue for women, for very many obvious reasons, for having caring responsibilities and having the ability to achieve more by having flexibility, there is starting to be a shift. Our survey demonstrates the benefits of flexible working, but with life changing fairly rapidly, there is a feeling that this is going to change again. And it's one of the issues that has come up in the 5 years we've been doing this survey, how important flexible working is for women. Remote working, as you can see, has continued to increase. But as I've just said, I think that there is change afoot. And that's talking to women at various events towards the end of last year, when they were looking at how the employment dimension was changing. So we can see that remote working has increased from when we started to looking at the survey, and how important that has been for most women in our industry. And although the press comments and flexible, as you can see on the slide, it's continued to be perceived as very positive by companies, and that is without doubt a very good thing for us. We do realize that change is afoot. Now, how effective companies will be in persuading staff to perhaps switch from 3 days a week in the office, 2 to 3 days, which has become the sort of norm, to 4 or more, will be very interesting when we do our survey this year, because from all the anecdotal stories I hear, I think we'll find it to be a very different picture.
I think that's such a good, thank you, Sue, for taking us through that. You know, it's really interesting. I'm just going to go back to the previous slide to see the 9-point increase in flexi time year over year, right, while remote working has stayed the same. Do you have any further insight? Is the flexi time about flexible start and, you know, end hours, so people can bundle their time around caregiving or other types of responsibilities?
It is. It's about being able to work, if you like, if you have children, and the ability to be able to work in the evening when you're having to pick up children from school. Similarly, in the morning, if you have to have a slightly later start, but then you make the hours up. And most of the time we find that the women that are able to have the flexibility actually put in a great deal of hard work into that time. They really appreciate the benefit of being able to plan their day around caring. And it's not just children, it's also caring responsibilities for elderly parents as well. So it's not just women with children, it's also the parental caring that comes into that picture. And there was such a seismic shift to working from home or working more flexibly during the pandemic that, as I think I said earlier, that one of the major concerns that we found was, well, not say concerns, one of the major desires was to increase flexibility, to take care of the things that women tend to take greater responsibility for.
Melissa, what are you seeing in India in terms of the return to office mandates, the pervasiveness of flex hours?
I think we have, in comparison to what's happening in the region, I think there are far more organizations in India that are offering flexible work. However, we know through the survey that 21% of respondents from India said that their employers do not perceive remote work very positively. And I think part of, the fact that they offer it is just that they're going with the trend, but we're beginning to see organizations, particularly the tech sector, start to mandate a return to work, some 3 days a week, some 5 days a week, and that's starting to happen. And I think that's just going to increase this year.
I know one of the topics we're going to touch on a little bit later is harassment. I was looking at some research that McKinsey did with Lean In, and they found that women who work remotely have much higher levels of psychological safety because they have less exposure to microaggressions in the day-to-day. So it's going to be really interesting to see with a focus on return to office, how can companies create or maintain, help women and all employees have high levels of psychological safety and create that inclusive environment that is so important, which enables us to all thrive. So I don't know if anyone in who's joining us today has a point of view. I think, you know, Danielle, it's great that you know that you're asking about that more positions are becoming virtual, and I think you're right. Some of it depends on the level of the job. So how can they be even more exclusive and expansive? And I think you know, to look at the timing, right, of the return to office, and how do you balance personal caregiving and dealing with the emergency. So having to plan sometimes in advance can be a real challenge for many of us.
It's true. And yeah, it's you know, the feedback that we have is that, you know, the flexibility is key. And for the first 4 years, well, the last 5 surveys, flexibility comes up there as something women wish to have, because of, as the Harvard professor said, you know, one of the major reasons that there are not more women on boards, and that across all industries, is down to a simple factor: caring responsibilities.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and it's so interesting, because another stat that really stuck out for me from the McKinsey Lean In was that both men and women consider flexibility as a top 3 employee benefit. Yet, you know, in so many articles and media coverage, flexibility is always tied with something women want, instead of talking about it more holistically, right? It's just valued in today's workplace by all talent, not just women. So yeah, really, really interesting.
And I think
actually, all right. Sorry, Melissa, you go.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I think while both employers and employees recognize the value of flexible work, I think what's not kind of kept pace is policies around flexible work.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what, you know, our respondents also want: more policies that are supportive of a work from home environment, and not just kind of fitting existing policies into flexible work.
Right. I think that's a really, really good point. And to give, you know, as Sue, you alluded to, right, many of us have caring responsibilities, but it's not just for children. It could be for elderly relatives, right? Parents, aunts, uncles, godparents. And so how do you create a more fluid benefits that can be inclusive, so that everyone can have access to those benefits, right? Because all of our situations are so different. Well, we can continue to keep talking about this because it's such a fascinating topic, but I know you have a lot of data to get through, and I want to be able to talk about the career progression and what helps or hinders, you know, our career growth and development. So why don't you start taking us through the next step of data?
Before I do, I will make one interesting observation. A few years ago, we had a head of an agency group in Scandinavia who had the reverse problem. She could not get enough men to come back into the business, because over there, taking paternity leave was absolutely unnatural. They would do it. She had women coming back in, and the men were saying, no, I really like working this way. So it was completely the opposite scenario, because their policies that they had in place encouraged men to do that, whereas we pay lip service to it, and it's not taken in the same vein. So there's it's interesting dynamic that if you do have the right policies in place, you can have a better balance. Anyway, on to the next.
Okay, so women in the boardroom.
Women in the boardroom. There's a lot of, despite the increases in flexible working, there is still a slow progression to change, sadly. And as you can see from the slide, the progress is not as fast as we would have liked it to be. I think we all rather hoped that flexibility and the desire to make changes would help more women be encouraged to take on those senior roles, and that the balance would start to shift in a better way, but it hasn't, as you can see. What are the biggest barriers? Well, as we've just been talking about, caring responsibilities at both ends of the scale. And almost as I alluded to in terms of what Scandinavia does and what we in the UK don't do, or we don't exercise it as well as it could be, is the lack of flexible working and family-friendly policies. That it's expected that it's women's roles to do that, where it's not. I mean, we have two parents, even single parents, but the lack of flexible and family-friendly policies is a barrier still for women taking on those senior positions. Also, I think it's an attitude problem. And as you can see from that stat, women are not as proactive about asking for promotions. We all know the story that if you give a job description, a woman will want to tick all the boxes for every aspect of that job. A man will apply for it, even if he's probably got 2/3 of the skills, would feel that he can go ahead. A woman will want to ensure she's overqualified rather than underqualified. It's an attitude of mind. It persists. Okay. It's having women in the boardroom is incredibly important, not just from a fairness perspective, but also I think we all know that it helps improve working practices. It also helps, as we've discovered, with profitability. A balanced boardroom tends to lead to a better run company that ultimately leads that company, if they're measuring in profitability, to being a more profitable company. The balance, without doubt, helps the productivity. And as you can see from these statistics, that is very much still the case.
So I'm going to just go back to that slide, but I have to pause. I'm going to actually go back one more slide. On this, 73% of women tend to be less proactive about asking for a promotion. Okay, everyone who is joining us today, are you experiencing that? Do you not ask for promotions or opportunities? Because again, digging into other data from INSEAD, from McKinsey, they find 9 out of 10 women under age 30 want to be promoted. 3 in 4 aspire to become senior leaders. Women and men at the director level are equally interested in C-suite roles. So there seems to be such a disconnect. And Catherine, yes, a barrier is preconceived ideas about what people are capable of. I absolutely believe we still have, right, these stereotypes about, you know, if you're decisive and assertive, that's a man, and women aren't. So love to hear, like, you know, for those of you listening in, what are you seeing, Melissa, from your perspective, you know, in India and across APAC? What are some of the barriers and the accelerators that are key?
I think the barriers are pretty much kind of reflected over here, probably more pronounced in India, because you already have a situation where the position of women is far lower than that of men. And I think women have got into the workforce in senior positions much later than the rest of the world. So these exist, and because of the social positioning of women, it's compounded by the social positioning, I think, of women in the in society itself.
No, I think that's a good point. And Jamie just shared that she's always had to change jobs to get a promotion. And that's a really good point, because very often, I think, and it underscores what Catherine said, that sometimes people see you in like one path and they focus on your performance and not your potential. And so that, I think, becomes really important for all of us as we are looking at the people that work with us. How do we help, right, support them? And Sue, to your point, you know, if you only have 7 of the 10 skills, go for that opportunity. How do we really challenge each other and make sure that we're not sitting in talent conversations where what are considered positive traits for men become viewed as derailers if you're a woman. So would love to hear if anyone has any other comments about that. And curious, are people seeing, is the return to office mandate something that folks are seeing as a potential negative impact on their career progression? A few are saying that it can be. We are going to talk about when you're 50 plus, Mary Ellen, so stay tuned because that is coming up. And we also are going to talk a little bit about microaggressions. And I think that's going to be a really good point on what are the issues that can hold women back. And they may not even be real issues, but there's perceptions around those issues. Other comments from participants? Melissa, Sue, anything else to add?
No, I mean, I think that the responses show it, that the barriers and the perceived barriers and having to think beyond it, as you rightly say, it's about, if you've only got 7 out of 10, go for it. If you will learn, you can step up to a role and you can learn by being in that role and adding to your skill set. I think women are more reticent. That's maybe the nature of us as the main caregivers. We're slightly more reticent to push as hard. Men don't have that kind of attitude. It's, well, of course I'm capable. I can only do 3 out of 10 of this, but I'm going to give it a go. And hey, guess what? I just might get it. And we're not so good at that.
So Camilla, I apologize if I did not pronounce your name correctly. I think you raised your hand. Did you want to ask a question?
Oh, thank you, Linda. No, when you asked if there were any more comments, I really feel like the digital landscape has provided an opportunity for women to really position themselves as thought leaders and to kind of work out loud, right? Like you can post things on and you can post if you're at a conference. And so that way, strategically, I'm a serial entrepreneur, but strategically, it's been a way to brand yourself outside of your corporation or your organization. And I feel like that is a great hack, because then if you're not acknowledged, like within the boardroom, if your fellows see that you're on panels or you're in environments like this, then it creates a value for you and you've created an audience. So I always mentor women to really work, quote unquote, work out loud on LinkedIn or on digital platforms.
I really love that, work out loud. That is such a great phrase. And thank you for sharing that. And, Christina, I think you bring up a good point. So, there is, we are, as women, we're working through, for longer periods. We are, driving and the backbone of so many companies. We are contending with not just parenthood, but we're dealing with menopause, menstruation. Women women of color may have other issues as health issues, as you point out. And this is where the flexible work and remote work or hybrid can really help us, give us the ability to look after our overall health, and find ways that we can still do all the things we need to do for ourselves, for our career, and for our family. And that's an important point that can't be lost in all of these. If we want women to really continue to be part of the workforce in our industry, then we need policies that really consider. We like to say, in fact, one of our predictions for 2024 is every company is a women's health company, for this reason, that to keep women in the workplace, we have to provide them with all the resources and ways of working that can meet all of their needs. So thank you for bringing that up. I want to continue the conversation, and Sue, take us into, what is very much a key area for me, which is ageism in the workplace. And what did we learn this year?
Sadly, it's still an issue. And I think we've all probably realized that. And it's a complex issue. It's not just a simple one of the caring responsibilities and giving up because of burnout. That's part of it. But it's also down to perhaps lack of role models. It's also down to it's whether you're working in agency or in-house. In-house is a much better balance than agency, which tends to be populated by a greater number of younger people. When you get past the age of mid-40s to 50s, whoa, the number really does decline. In-house, it's a much more, perhaps I say a more stable and a more perceived to be a more balanced situation. There is no one simple answer to it. It does exist. Lack of role models is cited, a bit like flexibility was earlier on in our surveys. When we started the survey, it's what would you really, really like? Well, there's not enough flexibility. Then suddenly we were overloaded with flexibility. And since we brought up the issue of ageism, there's been some very interesting things done to look at it in more detail. More organizations are looking at it in more detail. There's more coverage if you like, in the media about ageism, particularly as we're all living longer and the economy requires women to be in work for longer. There's very, cost of living, as we've all experienced, has gone through the roof. So the choice to step back early is becoming less as the economic pressure piles on as well. So I suspect that we will see in 2024 another shift in this and of women staying in the workplace for longer. But sometimes it's a case of, I can't see anybody doing a job at my age in this industry. And where we lose women is perhaps to other industries, going to do different things, different businesses, where they feel more comfortable at the age that they are. But there's not one single answer that addresses it, but it does exist and it's a problem.
Is there, let's see, okay, I want to go back because I found it so interesting that 54% of the respondents thought that they would move in-house when they, hit 50 plus, where my experience was when I turned 50, I was no longer valued in-house, and had the exact opposite experience where I came into an agency and everyone was telling me, oh, that's a young person's, place, be prepared for a lot of like discrimination. And I felt really embraced and valued for ideas and felt very, very welcome. So I'm really curious to hear from participants and from you, Melissa, about your own journeys. And, ageism, Sue, as you found last year, wasn't just about for those 45 or 50 plus. Very often women under 35 had experienced it by not being respected, right? They looked too young, right? Or weren't seen as being real contributors and respected for the point of view because of their appearance. So it works on both sides in the spectrum. And some research that Bonnie Marcus and Catherine Lindner did that was released in 2022 sort of built on that, and this emphasis on lookism and how that can affect women at every age and at every career stage. So yeah, please, Melissa, love to hear your perspective.
Okay. From my own experience, I moved out of the agency side when I was in my late 40s. And I don't think that really had anything to do with my gender. I just felt that, I could only contribute to a certain level in an agency, and I needed to move in-house because I felt that there was more value and more recognition that I would get and more in-depth that I could get in the corporate sector, which is why I moved. But having said that, over the last decade, and I moved jobs again 1.5 years ago, and honestly, I was so grateful to my organization. There was no conversation about my age, or any of that during the entire interview process. But having said that, when I've had calls from other organizations in the last 5 years, they've dropped off after asking me, and they ask very pointed questions about how old are you, and how long more do you have to retire, and stuff like that. So there is ageism, and it exists, and I find a lot of women struggling with that over here because there are no roles for women once in their 45, 50. So there are challenges that several women at senior levels are facing.
Well, we have a question from Rebecca, who would like to hear some advice on changing career paths after being, spending considerable time in one role, and specifically for someone who's 50 plus. So Sue and Melissa, do each of you want to share one piece of advice? And participants, if you've navigated a transition, love for you to just drop that into the chat as well, and I will share those more broadly.
Mentoring is such a good way of looking at having advice on changing roles and finding somebody not necessarily in your organization, but outside of your organization, with whom you can talk to about opportunities, about how to approach it, what exactly you're looking for, because it's very hard sometimes because you're entrenched, as you're indicating, I think, that other opportunities exist, and looking outside, using networking organizations to connect with other women, to find out more about opportunities that appeal, and to get a deeper understanding of the kind of things that you feel you would like to change into. One of the reasons we set up Global Women in PR was so that we could connect and learn from each other and understand what's happening. But in amongst doing that, when you meet, as we are now able to in different groups in our own countries, is that we talk and find out and discuss things face to face. And you'd be amazed how much information and support comes from that. And it's a case of, well, if you were talked to so that and an introduction can lead to finding some very good advice as to taking the next step, and never be afraid to ask for that guidance. And that can lead to different ways of thinking and make you think outside of where you're used to, but there are other opportunities for your skills. I think
that's it's such a good point that you made, because when I made my transition, when I was displaced after being in-house for many years, I talked to people from a number of marketing and communications disciplines to re-educate myself on
roll down your window.
Talking about communications and what the lexicon was in agencies versus in-house versus different types of brands, so that I could rebuild my resume in a way that my skills were transferable and translatable in a way that a hiring manager or a recruiter in a certain type of agency or a certain type of brand, it would resonate with them. So I think going out and doing a listening tour really helps. And some people have talked about, getting certifications, participating in network, I think are all really, really good points, and giving yourself the gift of time. Melissa, did you want to share one piece of advice for a career or a repackaging and a pivot?
Yeah, I think that it's a very dynamic world out there, and you've got to be very focused on, the career paths that you want to take and what are the additional skills that you would require for those career paths. So I think reskilling is an extremely important, or acquiring new skills. And I'd go back to what Sue said. I think mentoring is extremely important. And if there are role models in that field that you want to pursue, track them on LinkedIn, and that gives you some idea of really their career paths and how they engage. And therefore, there are lots of lessons that you can learn from that as well.
Perfect. Well, I want to keep the conversation moving. We have about 15 or so minutes left to really dig into the final area that we're going to explore, which is really where this is, correct me, right? So this was a new area that you looked at this year on how were women experiencing harassment in the workplace and to what degree? So take us through what you learned.
Yes, I mean, it was the first time we asked this question, and we were actually, I'd like to say surprised, but sadly, too many examples of harassment that came up as a result of the survey that we kind of guessed might be there. But I think it was a higher percentage who'd experienced that than perhaps we thought it might be. And we wanted to understand what, many people think that it's usually sexually orientated, but actually it's not. That, as you can see from the slide, psychological harassment is a very key issue, and it goes across all ages. It's not just limited to younger people starting out. It happens at every level. And the sad thing is that so many women do not report it, don't perhaps have the ability to have their concerns dealt with in an appropriate fashion. And when it comes to those reporting it, very often they're quietly let go rather than cause any disturbance. So it's a very powerful exercise. In fact, in the UK recently, a head of one of the largest retail operations was talking about women in the financial world where she came from, and that 40% of those who'd been surveyed had experienced sexual harassment. I mean, that's an incredibly high figure in an industry, I say, where you wouldn't expect it, but the figures are there. And our survey, I think, throughout, as you can see, and it's different levels, and finding a way to deal with that. Well, one of the first steps, of course, is to actually call it out, to say that this is real, it exists, it's not acceptable. We need to find ways of addressing it. We need to find policies in companies, or encourage companies to put in place policies that actually address some of the issues that have been shown in our survey that are very real for the women who've experienced them. I think we all have, to some extent. I certainly had in the beginning part of my career, not just at the beginning part of my career. And it's horrible. And you don't want to talk about it, but you have to in order to resolve it. And as you can see, it's just under half have reported it. And the sad thing, and those in junior positions are less likely to. And clearly there's a reason, because they're frightened of losing their jobs. They're frightened that they may not be taken seriously, and that, if they just pretend it didn't happen, it might go away. But unless we highlight it, it's also a bit like, dare I say, going back to Me Too, but unless you start to highlight it and talk about it, it's not going to change. So not calling it out is clearly not the way forward. But the statistics show that it's an important aspect of our working lives, that harassment is there, and high proportion of women in our industry have experienced it. As you can see, for those that reported it, as I said earlier, they were encouraged to leave. There were moves afoot that made the women who'd reported it feel uncomfortable enough to think, well, nothing's being done about this, I can't see any change, so the only way for me to deal with it is to leave. And that's not the outcome that's going to change the dial. But that is what our research has shown this year. So it's a very important issue, and it's a global issue. It's not, it's something that is happening around the world, certainly from what we've picked up from our research.
Well, and just to jump into, Deloitte and McKinsey both found very, very similar situations in terms of the prevalence of harassment, and also about the same, many women were not comfortable reporting and not seeing, even if they did report, that there was a positive outcome from their perspective. So you're absolutely right. This isn't just unique to our industry, but really pervasive in the workplace, regrettably, today.
Yeah, I mean, Melissa's done a lot of more research into this and drove this, which was great in terms of her work in Asia and in trying to understand the issue and how important it is to highlight it. And we wanted to include this question in our survey so that we could get a handle on how prevalent it was. And as you can see, it is prevalent. And you know, it's by calling it out and trying to instill or trying to encourage companies to make changes, because it's not just women who experience it, it's men too. But I think in the main, it's women who perhaps experience more of it, particularly of the perhaps the sexual encounters. But that's not to say men don't too. But it's unless we call it out. And we need to ensure that companies are prepared to adopt policies to take the issue seriously and not brush it under the carpet and pretend it doesn't exist, because that's not going to affect change. And by calling it out, we want to see more companies taking it seriously, and that women being taken seriously when they make a complaint and not made to feel that I'm going to lose my job, so therefore I'm not saying anything.
Yeah. And just to underscore, yeah, your point, and your absolutely fair point, right? Men and women experience harassment. A Deloitte survey from last year that across 10 countries found that there was a real uptick in the number of LGBTQ plus women and women in ethnic minority groups who experienced more non-inclusive behaviors over the past 12 months. But then, and in a McKinsey report, that women are 2 times as likely to be mistaken for someone junior, right? And that they're frequently given comments about their emotional state. And to a point, Christina, you raised about very often women who call out these behaviors are deemed as confrontational and stereotyped. I had an issue of harassment, and when I reported it, I was told female portfolio managers are kind of a dime a dozen, but this person who was a woman I was being bullied by, to do all of the operational grunt work that's required, they're hard to find. So we'll give you more money, but like, we're not going to do anything to change the behavior. And my path was to leave. But it was really interesting. It was just like, no one like, stop creating a wave, stop reporting this, stop making it an issue. So really, my heart is very sensitive to this. Melissa, before we open it up to broader questions, would love to hear about some of the other research that you did and what you found in India and more broadly across the APAC region.
Yeah, so I'll limit it to India, but I actually early last year in 2023, I suddenly found there were very senior, very accomplished communication professionals who were leaving the workforce. And when I spoke to some of them, I found that they were leaving because of harassment at the workplace, and it had become very toxic. And I was getting worried, because here we are the ones who craft communication about great workplaces, about organizational cultures, and yet we were being impacted negatively by what was happening to us. And so I decided to do a dipstick audit amongst 200 corporate communication professionals in India on harassment at the workplace. And the results were even more stark. I mean, over 95% of them said that they faced harassment at the workplace, and about over 60% left because of it, because they had no recourse, really. And I just wanted to say, while we're talking about remote work and the safe spaces it provides for us as women, it was not the case in my research necessarily. I mean, the fact that there was a certain anonymity, the fact that there was a blurring of personal and professional lives, made managers feel entitled to harass their team members or their junior colleagues. And I saw some of that as, because what I did was also qualitative. And So we have to also kind of be mindful of the fact that even in remote workplaces, harassment does occur. And I think that anonymity gives one the license to do it without fear of repercussion. And having said that, and going back to what you've said earlier, I think the important thing is, what do we do about it? We need to do something about it and find ways of addressing workplace harassment, because very often it's just perceived to be sexual harassment and not the other forms of harassment, which do cause mental trauma, which cause people to leave the workforce, and we're losing some of our best talent due to harassment issues.
That's such an important point about all of us, right? Have the ability and the opportunity to call out behavior, right? To help someone that has experienced it, how to report it, how to navigate it, and be a real ally for helping ensure that they get heard. I want to stop sharing the screen so that we could move into the Q&A and continue to discuss these topics. And while we were speaking, hello everyone. Now it's nice to see more of you. A couple of questions did come in that I want to be sure that we have a chance to address. And I'm sorry, I didn't write everyone's name down, and I was making a note of the questions, but someone asked, what advice would we share for someone who is just starting out in their career in the industry? And so, Sue, may I start with you? What would be your advice to your 21-year-old self entering the communications field?
Find a mentor. Join a networking organization where you meet other women in the profession who might be working in different industries. Look at the upskilling that you can do to progress to the next level, and just build a core of associates with whom, not that you're working directly, but outside of your environment, so that you can learn and add something to the business that you're in, and that you can see things from another perspective. I think that's really important.
Melissa?
Yeah, I think three things. One is to find mentors and role models. I think the second thing is really not to give up, because it's so easy today to get very disillusioned. But I think, be in it for the long term and kind of give it your all. And the third thing is really to put your hand up and, handle additional assignments, find new ways that will keep you excited, where you can learn a lot more than what your, kind of identified role or, dictated role really is.
And I would add to that. I would say, use particularly the days and times you are in an office, observe others, watch how they interact, watch how they dress, watch how they engage, listen to how they navigate questions in a meeting, and ask your line manager, the account person maybe you're working with, like, what haven't I asked you? Like, what should I know? Because I know it's been so long since I've been at the start of my career, I forgot what I didn't know then. So be sure to ask, like, should I have asked you other questions? Like, what would you, ask a colleague, and don't be afraid to ask questions. There's no stupid question, but it's the only way that you will learn, and you have to kind of take a risk on that. We had one other question that came in, which is about, those who may have stepped out of the paid workplace to raise a family or to care for aging relatives, using many skills, but there's a gap in their resume. Any advice? And I'm opening this up to all of us who are joining in today about how to bridge that quote unquote career or that work gap. I say just talk about the skills that you've used. They're all transferable, whether you're managing a project or having to manage all the caregiving for your children or your parents. that's probably toughest. If anyone in the US has had to navigate Medicaid and Medicare, that is real expertise. So yeah, don't undersell, but think about ways of just translating those experiences into something that's work relevant. Melissa, I see you nodding if you want to add anything else to that.
No, I completely agree. Don't be afraid to call it out on your resume, but add the skills that it has taught you and the value it has brought.
Sue, anything to add on your part?
No, I mean, it is about, the things that you've left to do, but you can also keep in touch. You can maintain connections. You can do, keep up with looking online, reading, learning as you go, so that you've got some of the up-to-date information. Because you're out of it doesn't mean that you don't need to be connected. And again, I go back to the networking groups. If you've taken time out to have children, as in the early years of Women in PR, when I was a member and I had a young baby, and there were other women who'd taken time out, but they came to some of the events so that they could meet old friends and colleagues, and that helped them when they were ready to get back into the workplace, because they were known, because they'd made the connections. That really helped. And just quietly keep up to date with the industry or the sector that you're in, so that you are mentally prepared to go back. There's no harm in stopping and going back, but it's and I think, going back to the earlier question, it's one word that perhaps spans both of them, and that's curiosity. Always remember curiosity. Be curious, ask, explore. One word, just be curious, and you can find out a lot.
Well, unfortunately, we're going to have to bring our conversation to a close. I can't think of a more positive, inspirational way to end our conversation on, but curiosity. Sue and Melissa, thank you so much for joining us today. Everyone, thank you. We know your time is valuable. We really appreciate you not only joining, but sharing so many great insights and ideas, and really being a panelist alongside of us. We hope to continue the conversation with WICI and with GWPR. And please, we've included the links to both organizations in the chat. Check out the organizations. You will be better for it. Amazing women in both groups. So thank you again. Megan, thank you for organizing today's session, and I will turn it over to you to wrap.
You basically handled it all, but
Okay.
Again, on behalf of New York Wiki, thank you so much for joining us. We will be having a Next Level U session next week. So if you are able to join us next February 6th, next Tuesday, go ahead and check out our website and get registered for that event on negotiating your salary. But thank you again to Susan, Melissa, and Linda. We value your time and your expertise, and this has been nothing short of amazing. And we hope you all have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.